In 1983, three armed men walked into a small museum in Jerusalem and stole 106 clocks and watches. Most were never seen again, but one of them was different. One of them had taken 44 years to build. It was commissioned by a secret admirer for a queen who was beheaded before it was finished. The man who designed it died before it was finished too. And when it finally vanished into the night, it was worthy, by some estimates, more than $30 million. This is the story of the most expensive watches the world has ever seen. Watches that cost more than mansions, more than private jets. Watches that people fought over, lied for, and in some cases killed for. Some of them you could almost afford. One of them sold for the price of a small skyscraper. Stay with me, because the reason these tiny machines are worth so much is stranger than you think. And the story at number one changed the watch world forever. Before we start the countdown, let me tell you about that stolen watch, because it sets the stage for everything that follows. Its name is the Marie Antoinette, made by a man called Abraham Louis Breguet, the greatest watchmaker who ever lived. In 1783, an anonymous customer walked into his workshop in Paris and placed an order. He wanted the most complicated, most beautiful watch ever made as a gift for the Queen of France. Money was no object. Time was no object. Breguet was told to use gold wherever another maker would use brass, and to fit every single complication known to watchmaking into one case. He worked on it, on and off, for the rest of his life. The Queen was executed in 1793. Breguet himself died in 1823. The watch was not finished until 1827, 44 years after it was ordered, completed by his son, and then a century and a half later, it was stolen. For 24 years, nobody knew where it was. It resurfaced only in 2007, quietly returned through a lawyer. It has never been sold at auction because the people who own it will not put a price on it. So we begin our list with the watches that did have a price, and every single one of them is a story. Number 10, we start with a watch that looks, at first glance, almost ordinary. A yellow gold Rolex day date, the kind of watch you have seen on a 100 wrist. This one belonged to Jack Nicklaus, the greatest golfer who ever lived, and he wore it, the same watch, nearly every day for 50 years. He bought it in 1967. He wore it for 18 of his major championships. He wore it to the White House. He wore it gardening. By the time he decided to sell it for charity in 2019, the gold was soft and worn from half a century against his skin, and the case had the gentle scratches of a life fully lived. It sold for $1.22 million, the most anyone has ever paid for a Rolex day date. And here is the lesson hidden inside that price. The watch itself, brand new, was worth a few $1,000s. Everything else, the other million, was the man who wore it. That is the secret of this entire list. You are almost never paying for the metal. You are paying for the story attached to it. Remember that, because it only gets more extreme from here. Number 9, this one was not made by a company at all. It was made by a single man in a workshop in England, entirely by hand. His name was George Daniels, and he is arguably the most important watchmaker of the 20th century. Here is why. Making a watch from scratch requires around 32 separate crafts, from cutting gears to hardening steel to painting dials. In the modern world, 32 different specialists do those 32 jobs. George Daniels taught himself to do all of them alone. He is one of the only people in history who could take raw metal and produce a finished, working watch with his own 2 hands, start to finish. The watch on our list is called the Space Traveler, and he built it to celebrate the moon landing. It tells 2 kinds of time at once, the time we live by and the time the stars actually keep. When it sold in 2019, it went for $4.5 million for a watch one man made in a shed. But Daniels gave the world something worth far more than that. He invented a new kind of escapement, the beating heart of a mechanical watch, the first genuinely new design in 200 years. Millions of watches use his idea today. He changed watchmaking, and then he made himself a watch to celebrate the stars. Number 8. In May of 2017, a plain-looking black-dialed Rolex crossed the auction block in Geneva and became, that night, the most expensive Rolex in the world. It sold for $5.06 million. But the reason was not the watch, it was the man who ordered it. His name was Bao Dai, and he was the last emperor of Vietnam. In 1954, while attending the conference that would ultimately divide his country in two, the emperor walked into a Rolex boutique in Geneva and asked for the rarest, most exceptional watch they had. Not the most expensive on the shelf, the rarest. Rolex gave him a reference 6062 black dial, with diamonds set only on the even numbers, a detail so unusual that it is believed no other example like it exists. An emperor losing his throne, buying the rarest watch on earth as his country slipped through his fingers. That is what $5 million buys, not diamonds. A moment in history you can wear on your wrist. Number 7, now we come to Hollywood. In 1979, an actor arrived on the chaotic, jungle-soaked set of one of the most famous films ever made, Apocalypse Now. He was playing Colonel Kurtz, and he was a perfectionist about detail. He looked down at the Rolex GMT-Master on his wrist, a rugged pilot's watch, and decided it was too shiny, too obvious for the role. So he did something that would horrify any collector today. He took a tool and pried the rotating bezel off the watch himself, leaving it bare and stripped down. He wore it like that through the entire film. That actor was Marlon Brando. For decades, collectors debated whether the watch even still existed. Then, in 2019, Brando's daughter brought it to auction. On the back, scratched by hand, were the words, M. Brando. It sold for $5.375 million, a watch its owner deliberately damaged, worth millions, precisely because of the damage, because that damage was done by Marlon Brando in the jungle, making a masterpiece. Number 6, this one is about beauty. Pure and simple. Patek Philippe, reference 2,523. And if you only look at the dial, you will understand the price before I say a word. It is a world time watch, meaning it shows the hour in 24 cities at once, all the way around the dial. And in the center, instead of a plain metal disc, there is a hand-painted map of the world, done in a technique called cloisonné enamel. An artist takes thin gold wire, bends it into the shape of the continents, fixes it to the dial, and then fills each tiny compartment with colored glass powder before firing it in a kiln at extreme heat. One wrong second in the fire, and weeks of work shatter. Almost no one alive can still do it well. This particular example was double signed, sold through a legendary retailer in Milan. And when it came up for auction in 2019, it reached $8.97 million for a painting the size of a coin. That also happens to tell you the time in Tokyo. Number 5, we are now leaving the world of expensive watches and entering the world of the impossible. Patek Philippe, reference 1,518 in stainless steel. Now, on paper, that sounds cheap, steel, but listen carefully. The 1,518 was the first perpetual calendar chronograph ever made in a production run, a watch that tracks the date, the day, the month, and the leap year, correcting itself perfectly, and it will not need adjusting until the year 2100. Patek made around 280 of them. Almost all were in gold, but a tiny handful, just 4 known to exist, were made in steel during the Second World War, when the world was on fire and precious metal was needed for the war effort. So these were made in humble steel for a few clients who wanted them in the middle of history's darkest hour. Today, that wartime steel is worth more than any gold. In 2016, one of the 4 sold for $11.1 million. 4 watches survive. Imagine owning one of 4, number 4. And now, the watch that made the whole world pay attention to vintage Rolex. A Rolex Cosmograph Daytona, reference 6,239, with a strange exotic dial that Rolex struggled to sell when it was new. Nobody wanted it. It sat in cases. And then it ended up on the wrist of a movie star who also happened to be one of the fastest racing drivers in America. His wife, terrified he would kill himself on the track, gave him the watch as a gift. On the back, she had it engraved with a quiet plea, "Drive carefully, me." He wore it constantly for 15 years, on set and at the racetrack, until that specific style of dial became known worldwide simply as the Paul Newman. And then in 1984, Newman took the watch off his wrist and handed it casually to his daughter's boyfriend, a young man named James Cox, who had asked him the time. "Keep it," Newman said. "It works." That young man kept it for over 30 years. And in 2017, he sold it for $17.75 million, making it, at that moment, the most expensive wristwatch ever sold. A watch nobody wanted, given away as a warning, then given away again as a favor, worth almost $18 million. Number 3. To understand number 3, you have to understand a rivalry. In the early 20th century, 2 of the richest men in America, a banking heir named Henry Graves Jr. and an automobile magnate named James Ward Packard, became locked in a quiet, gentlemanly war. The prize? To own the single most complicated watch in the world. Each man commissioned Patek Philippe to outdo the other, complication by complication, for years. And in 1925, Graves commissioned the watch that would end the argument forever. He asked Patek to build the most complicated watch that human beings could make. It took them 8 years. When it was finished in 1933, it had 24 separate complications. It could chime the hour like Big Ben. It could track the phases of the moon. And on its face, it showed the exact night sky, the precise position of the stars, as seen from the windows of Henry Graves's own apartment on Fifth Avenue in New York City. For nearly half a century, it was the most complicated watch on Earth, made without a single computer by hand. When it last sold in 2014, it reached $24 million, the most expensive pocket watch in history. Number 2. Before we reach number 1, I want you to understand how big the jump is about to be. Every watch so far has had a story, a person, a piece of history. Number 2 is different. Number 2 is about pure, staggering technical achievement and a case made of the humblest metal on earth. But the reason it belongs so high on this list is a single word that, in the watch world, means everything. Unique. There are watches worth millions because a star wore them. And then there are watches worth millions because there is only one, and there will only ever be one. Which brings us, at last, to the watch that broke every record in history. Number 1, on the 9th of November 2019, in a sale room in Geneva, a watch was placed on the block for a children's charity. It was a Patek Philippe, and it was called the Grandmaster Chime, reference 6300A. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most complicated wristwatches ever made, with 20 complications, including 5 different chiming functions, and a case that is reversible with a second full dial on the back. Patek made this model only in precious metals, gold and platinum. But for this one charity auction, they made a single solitary example in stainless steel, marked with the letter A, and they promised it would be the only steel one that would ever exist. The bidding started. It climbed past 10 million, past 20 million. And when the hammer finally fell, the price was $31.19 million. For a single wristwatch, it remains, to this day, the most expensive watch and one of the most expensive objects of any kind ever sold at auction. And here is the beautiful part. Every dollar of that 31 million went to helping sick children. The most expensive watch in the world was also, in a way, the most generous. So there it is. From a golf legend's daily Rolex, to an emperor losing his throne, to a queen who never lived to see her gift, to $31 million for a machine you could hold in one hand. And if you take just one thing away from all of this, let it be the lesson we found back at number 10. You are almost never paying for the metal, or even for the craftsmanship, extraordinary as it is. You are paying for the story. A watch is the only machine we own that we pass down through generations, that we engrave with our love, that we hand to a stranger and say, keep it, it works. That is why they are worth so much. Not because of what they are, but because of what they carry. If you enjoy these stories, there are hundreds more hidden inside the world of watches, and I tell a new one every week. Subscribe, and I will see you at the next one.